January 2018. The night shift at Villa Horizontes stretched quiet and fluorescent across 3 residential towers, where Julio had worked security for 5 years without incident. The building's surveillance system held 14 channels of grainy footage, aging DVR units that clicked and whirred in the basement technical room, and access logs that should have told the complete story of who moved through restricted corridors after midnight. But on Tuesday the 9th, Julio found a 15th camera tucked behind a utility panel, its lens pointed at a service hallway that wasn't supposed to need watching, and when he checked its feed, he saw the image had been frozen for weeks, while its hidden recording counter showed 847 minutes of recent activity with no corresponding entry in the Access database. Julio Mendez was 43 and careful. He'd learned careful from his father, who'd worked as a building superintendent for 30 years, and told him that job security came from making yourself indispensable without making yourself a problem. So Julio kept his own maintenance logs, even though the company provided official ones, photographed equipment failures on his personal phone, memorized which residents tipped at Christmas and which ones filed complaints over nothing. The night air in São Paulo carried diesel exhaust and the distant compression of highway traffic. Inside Villa Horizontes, the lobby smelled like industrial floor cleaner and the coffee maker he'd started at midnight. The building had been his territory for so long that he could hear when something changed pitch in the elevator machinery 3 floors above, could tell when the backup generator needed oil by a particular rattle in its housing. He'd been checking the basement technical room because the DVR had frozen twice that week, something the day shift supervisor blamed on network congestion, but which Julio suspected came from the ancient router overheating. The room was cramped and warm, cables zip-tied in loose bundles along the ceiling, dust coating every horizontal surface. The main DVR sat on a metal shelf, its indicator lights blinking green and amber in steady rhythm. That's when he saw the cable, a gray Ethernet line running behind the shelving unit, disappearing into the wall cavity where no cable should go. He pulled the shelf away from the wall, metal scraping concrete, and found the camera mounted on a bent bracket. It was a Hikvision unit from maybe 2011, the kind they'd phased out during the 2015 upgrade. The lens was pointed through a gap in the drywall toward the service corridor connecting towers B and C. The corridor was supposed to be maintenance access only, used maybe once a week when the plumber came through or when residents moved furniture. Julio had walked it 1,000 times. The walls were cinder block painted institutional beige. The floor was sealed concrete. The lighting was 2 tube fixtures that hummed with aging ballasts. He traced the camera's cable to a small network switch hidden behind the shelf, then from there to channel 14 on the DVR. Channel 14 had been listed as inactive in every inventory report since 2016, but the recording indicator showed activity. Not continuous footage, just sporadic chunks. 3 minutes here, 12 minutes there, always between midnight and 3 in the morning. Julio's hands went cold despite the room's warmth. He pulled out his phone and photographed the setup, making sure to capture the cable routing, the switch model number, the camera's MAC address printed on its housing. Then he checked the DVR's playback interface, navigating to channel 14. The most recent footage was from 8 days ago. The timestamp read 02-14-33. A figure moved through the service corridor, visible for maybe 6 seconds before passing out of frame. The video quality was poor, the hallway lighting insufficient for detail, but the person appeared to be wearing something on a lanyard around their neck. Could have been a building ID badge. Could have been anything. Julio scrolled backward through the recordings. Similar clips appeared every 5 to 7 days, always in that same 2-hour window. Sometimes the figure walked toward Tower C, sometimes back toward B. The gait looked purposeful, not furtive. Someone who knew where they were going. He checked the access log database on the supervisor's terminal, pulling up the corresponding dates and times. According to the RFID system, nobody had opened the service corridor doors during those timestamps. The doors were supposed to lock automatically, requiring either an active security badge or a physical key. The building had discontinued issuing physical keys in 2016 when they upgraded to the RFID system. The air in the technical room tasted metallic. Julio's mouth had gone dry. He needed to document this properly. But the DVR's export function was ancient and slow, requiring real-time playback to copy footage. A 6-hour shift would let him save maybe 5 hours of material if he started immediately. And the DVR only retained 32 days of recording before the oldest footage got overwritten. He did the math. The next weekly backup would run automatically Friday night in 4 days. If this footage wasn't copied before then, it might be the only evidence lost to the system's rolling deletion cycle. But copying files during his shift without explicit authorization violated company protocol. The security firm had fired a guard in Tower A last year for accessing recordings outside his assigned duties. Julio made the decision in 30 seconds. He plugged a USB drive into the DVR's front panel and started queuing the Channel 14 footage, selecting clips from the past 3 weeks. The progress bar crawled. 2%. 5%. The DVR's cooling fan spun faster, the unit's heat spreading into the already warm room. While the transfer ran, he pulled up the building's employee access records. Only 4 people had unrestricted access to the technical room: himself, the day shift guard Carlos, the building syndic Marcelo, and the previous security company's technical supervisor who'd left when the contract changed 9 months ago. That supervisor's name was Rogerio something. Julio couldn't remember the surname. The USB drive filled slowly. By 0300, he had 23 video clips totaling about 40 minutes of footage. The clips showed the same pattern. A person moving through the corridor, always alone. Sometimes carrying what looked like a bag or toolbox, sometimes not. The footage never showed a face clearly enough for identification. At 05:30, near the end of his shift, Julio called the remote supervisor. The phone rang 6 times before Ricardo answered, his voice thick with sleep or boredom. "Yeah, what's up?" "Found something unusual in the basement. There's a camera that's not in the inventory, Channel 14. It's been recording the service corridor. Channel 14's deactivated." "That's what I thought, but it's active. Been recording for weeks, and the access logs don't match what's on video." Silence. Then Ricardo sighed, a sound Julio had learned meant dismissal. "Probably just a wiring issue. Old system gets weird sometimes. Log it in the occurrence book and I'll have someone check it next week." The footage shows someone accessing restricted areas during timestamps with no logged entries. "Julio." Ricardo's tone shifted to something harder. "You're not supposed to be reviewing footage without a specific incident report. That's in the manual, Section 4. Log the technical issue and leave the investigation to management. Clear?" "But if someone's bypassing?" "Clear." Julio's jaw tightened. "Clear." The line went dead. He stood in the technical room for another minute, USB drive heavy in his pocket, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Then he went upstairs to write the occurrence report in the logbook, dating and timing it at 05:47, describing the unauthorized camera and the access log discrepancies in neutral, factual language. Carlos arrived at 06:00 for the day shift. He was younger than Julio, maybe 30, and treated the job like a placeholder between better opportunities. He glanced at the occurrence book while drinking gas station coffee that smelled like burnt oil. "What's this about a mystery camera? Found equipment that shouldn't be there. Recordings don't match access logs." Carlos shrugged. "Probably just some forgotten stuff from the old company." "You worried about it?" "I'm worried about not knowing who's walking through restricted areas at 2 in the morning. Man, this building's been standing for 14 years. If something bad was going to happen, it would have happened already." Carlos set his coffee down and pulled out his phone, already scrolling. "Don't stress about it. Management will handle it or they won't." Julio drove home through São Paulo's early morning traffic, the sky turning from black to gray to the pale yellow of smog-filtered sunrise. His apartment was 11 kilometers away, a studio on the 4th floor of a building older than Villa Horizontes. He didn't sleep well, kept thinking about the figure in the hallway, the frozen timestamps, Ricardo's dismissive tone. The next night, Julio came in early. He went straight to the technical room and checked the DVR. Channel 14 had recorded again, 01:47 to 01:54, 7 minutes, same corridor. This time the figure appeared to stop halfway through the frame, looking at something on the wall. then continued out of view. He submitted a formal digital incident report through the company's system, bypassing Ricardo and sending it directly to the security firm's regional manager. He attached timestamps, referenced the inventory discrepancy, noted the access log contradictions. He kept his language technical and unemotional. Sent it at 23:22. The regional manager responded at 10:15 the next morning with a brief email saying the report had been forwarded to the building syndic for review and that Julio should refrain from further investigation pending management direction. The tone was professional, but carried an implicit warning. By Wednesday night, Julio felt the situation slipping beyond his control. The footage kept accumulating. The access logs stayed empty. Nobody seemed to care. He decided to escalate directly to Marcelo, the syndic. He called Marcelo's cell at 2300, knowing he was violating protocol by contacting management outside official channels. Marcelo answered on the third ring. "Julio, everything okay? Need to discuss a security situation. It's not urgent, but it's important." Marcelo listened to the explanation without interrupting. When Julio finished, Marcelo was quiet for several seconds. Then, "You have copies of this footage?" "Yes." "Can you meet me in the basement tomorrow morning, 11 o'clock? I'll bring 2 council members. We'll inspect this together." "I can do that." "And Julio? Don't mention this to anyone else until after we meet." "Understood." Thursday morning was overcast and humid. Julio met Marcelo in the lobby at 10:55, along with 2 residents he recognized from council meetings, a retired engineer named Paulo and a lawyer named Fernanda. They descended to the basement without conversation. The inspection took 40 minutes. Paulo photographed everything, taking notes in a small leather notebook. Fernanda examined the cable routing, traced connections, checked serial numbers. Marcelo mostly watched, arms crossed, expression neutral. Paulo found where the camera's power adapter was plugged into an outlet hidden behind the shelf. The cable showed recent wear, the insulation scuffed clean in places. Fernanda noted that the switch feeding the camera wasn't part of the building's network architecture, meaning whoever installed it had done so separately from the official infrastructure. "This wasn't here during the last security audit," Marcelo said. "That was July last year, 8 months ago." "So either it was installed after that," Paulo said, "or whoever did the audit didn't look carefully enough. Or didn't want to report it," Fernanda added. They went upstairs to Marcelo's unit and reviewed the footage on Julio's USB drive. The clips played on Marcelo's laptop, the service corridor looking even grainier on the larger screen. After the 6th clip, Paulo paused the video. "That's definitely a badge on a lanyard. See the reflective strip? Could be a resident," Fernanda said. "Could be maintenance. Could be someone from the old security company. But whoever it is," Marcelo said, "they're not using the RFID system. They're using a physical key or forcing the door somehow." Paulo closed his notebook. "We need a formal investigation, internal audit, access records review, maybe bring in an external security consultant." "That's expensive," Marcelo said. "More expensive than a lawsuit if something happens and we knew about unauthorized access but didn't act." Marcelo nodded slowly. "I'll call an emergency council meeting for Saturday. We'll vote on opening an investigation and allocating budget." The meeting happened in the Tower B common room, 23 residents attending out of 64 units. Marcelo presented the situation carefully, avoiding speculation, focusing on facts. Julio sat in the back, watching faces react. Some residents looked concerned, others skeptical, a few annoyed at the potential cost implications. The vote passed. 18 in favor, 3 against, 2 abstaining. Budget approved for an external security audit, maximum 30,000 Rs, timeline 3 weeks. The audit firm arrived the following Tuesday. 2 technicians spent 4 days examining the system. They pulled DVR logs, analyzed RFID access patterns, compared power consumption records with equipment inventories. They found 6 dates when brief power outages, lasting between 2 and 4 minutes, corresponded exactly with gaps in the surveillance coverage and unlogged accesses to the service corridor. The probability of random coincidence was calculated at 27%. Their report, delivered 18 days into the investigation, concluded that someone with knowledge of the building systems had deliberately exploited the power outage windows to access restricted areas without detection. The unauthorized camera appeared to be someone's way of monitoring those activities, though whether for security purposes or other reasons remained unclear. The report recommended immediate replacement of all service corridor locks, cancellation of all access credentials issued before 2016, installation of redundant logging systems, and security camera coverage expansion. The cost estimate was 180,000 reais spread over 3 months. The monthly building fee would increase 18%. During the investigation, building atmosphere changed. Garage traffic dropped by a fifth. Residents who'd always smiled in elevators now nodded without speaking. The WhatsApp groups filled with theories, each more elaborate than the last. The old security company was notified and asked to provide equipment inventories. They claimed the camera was never part of their installation, suggesting it was experimental equipment from before their contract began. The building's records showed no such experiments. Someone had used the service corridor systematically, during specific windows of opportunity, for purposes that remained unknown. The camera had documented it, but the camera itself was an unauthorized installation by unknown parties. Julio was transferred to afternoon shift, considered more strategic in the new security configuration. He received a formal commendation letter and a verbal warning about accessing archived footage without explicit authorization, the company's way of acknowledging his diligence while maintaining protocol authority. 3 months later, the new system went live. 40% more camera coverage, dual authentication for all restricted access, photographic logging of every maintenance visit. The building operated smoothly, efficiently, expensively. But the forgotten camera sat in a locked evidence box in Marcelo's office, its memory card sealed in an envelope, its recordings backed up on 3 separate drives. The investigation never identified who installed it, who appeared in its footage, or why those midnight walks through the service corridor had been necessary enough to risk discovery. In security work, Julio had learned, some mysteries solve themselves through prevention rather than revelation. You make the system tight enough that the questions become irrelevant. You make the cost of curiosity higher than the benefit of knowing. Still, on quiet nights when the building settled into its rhythm of humming ventilation and distant traffic, Julio sometimes thought about that figure in the corridor, moving with purpose through the camera's grainy field of view, walking toward something or away from something, carrying what might have been a toolbox or might have been something else entirely. The footage existed. The access logs existed. The discrepancy existed. But the person who'd known exactly when the cameras would be blind, who'd walk those corridors as if they owned them, who'd watch themselves being watched by a camera they may or may not have installed, that person had dissolved into the building's history like water into concrete, leaving only the faint mineral stain of their presence. Julio learned to live with that. You don't always get answers. Sometimes you just get better locks.